Mike, I hope you're having a great day. Welcome into the game here in Tuscaloosa.
Thank you, Ron. Appreciate it.
No doubt. I hope it's not as cold down there as it is up here because
it's around 40 degrees here.
Yeah, it is here too, and it's I don't know. I feel like we're living in Seattle rather than in the South. I mean, it's just been rainy and cold for like the last week and a half.
Well, crazy thing is Sunday we were in the 80s, and now we're down to 40. It's nutty weather, but hey, listen, that's living in the South. That it can go from that extreme sort of temperature, and but hey, it's better than living in it all the time.
No, 100%.
You know what I mean?
No,
it's better
100%.
than living with it all the time.
Hey, I don't hear many people saying that I want to retire and go to Michigan, right, or Minnesota. No, they want to go south. They want to move to the south.
I got some friends of mine who actually they in the off-field business for so many years here. They went through the roller coaster, up and down, up and down, up and down. And then they decided they got contract offers for 3 years, go work in the Dakotas.
Ooh.
Man, they hear them talk about, man, this ain't nothing. You ought to come here and feel that wind whip and that cold weather, working in North and South Dakota. So, but, there's a lot of fracking that goes on there. And so, it's quite a culture shock for them, and also a temperature shock.
Oh, I could imagine. Hey, Mike, let me ask you: when you look at this schedule for the SEC, should we do something about this? Can we do something about this? This week, we always look forward to football, and then we get to the week, the last week before the last week, and we get to this week, and it's not very good college football in the SEC.
No, Paul, it is what it is. I think they've tried to change some of that because I think some of that was happening actually early in the season. And that sort of has changed a little bit. But I think you're always going to have one of those weeks in the season where ain't much going on, and so you do what you have to do to get by. And the upsets are not happening in the SEC. I'll put it to you that way. Not this week. It ain't happening. It may happen somewhere else, but it's not happening here. And I think you sort of see that periodically in some of the other conferences too, almost as though they've all sort of teamed up for 1 week where kind of putting it on hold. So I think that's going to continue.
But Mike,
I think it's more changed toward the beginning of the year.
But Mike, maybe we could push this week towards the beginning of the year, right? I mean, because it's like all the conferences do this, but we're getting more exposure because it's crunch time and everybody's focused in on the schedule and strength of schedule, and maybe that's why the SEC gets a bad look for this week.
Yeah, and because the SEC is relevant. Okay, other than Washington State. Are you watching Pac-12 football?
No.
And for some people, even Washington State, they don't watch. You look at the Big Ten, I think there's a huge gap this year between the haves and the have-nots in there. And, and all this stuff, we talked about it a year ago. All these people beating their chests about how much, the Big Ten and the Pac-12 had caught up with the SEC. Do you hear them talking about that today? They've changed their tune about all of that. No, because it's relevant on what happens with Alabama, what happens with a Georgia, what happens with an LSU. All those teams in the top 7. So, it does throw a lot of spotlight, and especially Alabama, because of who they are and what they've accomplished and what Nick has done. And you got the best player in the country, and he's not healthy. So, you're going to have a lot of attention on the Citadel game just because I think people want to see if Tua will play and for how long he'll play if he does play.
Mike, let me ask you, what is your thoughts on Tua as far as his knee? I mean, it seems like it's one of those that's just going to be bothersome throughout until he gets some rest is what my interpretation is. What do you see?
Yeah, the same thing. Whatever he has, and we'll find out a little bit more after the season. And it may even be a situation where they have to go do a little cleanup in it some kind of way. So we'll see as it goes along. Swelling with a knee, and especially with temperature change, occurs. I don't care who you are. if you've got someone who has had a back injury or a knee injury or a hand injury, ask them how it is when they have a temperature change. It dramatically affects them. It affects how they walk, how their workouts, everything affects them. And so I think that situation, you try to get the best treatment you can. When you're younger, you rehab better. Come on, your body responds better to you, in those sort of situations than someone who's in their, say, 40s or 50s or older. When you've got a 20-year-old, it's totally different. So, the injury he has, and that was a shot he took to the knee, and it's paramount. Not so much this week, but when you're going to play Georgia. I mean, come on. They've sort of hit their stride a little bit, football-wise. I think after the LSU beating, I think they went back and said, what are we doing right, what are we doing wrong? Come on, you got to run the ball. You can't rely on Jake Fromm to throw 35 passes in a game. That's not going to work for them. But with that combination they have with Holyfield and Swift, that's pretty potent if you're trying to stop it. They are really good running the football. And their defense has gotten better scheme-wise. And the thing that threw them off, I think, is a fast-paced offense. And I suspect when Alabama plays them, they'll steal what LSU did and run that fast-paced offense, because it really caught Georgia off stride. They weren't prepared for that. And you couldn't substitute. And, and I can remember Nick saying this years ago about, the fast pace, that not only does it affect you substitution-wise, it affects you communication-wise. Coming up to the line of scrimmage, calling a play, that sort of thing, real quick. 10 people might get it, one doesn't. If you're a real sharp quarterback and you can figure out who doesn't get it, then you're going to make a big play on it. So you can see what's building up here, especially between Georgia and Alabama, up to that SEC championship game.
Mike, I want to go to this offensive line here for just a couple of minutes. They've taken a lot of criticism here locally when you look at the way they performed against Mississippi State. Was that Mississippi State's defense bringing the heat, or was this offensive line performing poorly on Saturday?
Well, look, you played 2 first-round pick guys. Jeffrey Simmons and Marquez Sweat, they're going to go in the first round of the draft. And they were selling out. They were trying to put as much pressure as they could, and it is part of, hey, listen, it's almost a run blitz situation where get into the backfield, play the run along the way, but if they throw in the football, then you affect the quarterback. And one missed block, one missed assignment, maybe shooting a gap, got a guy beat a player one-on-one, like what a Jeffrey Simmons can do, like what Sweat can do. Yeah, you're going to have those sort of games. The other thing, Ryan, that doesn't maybe get as much ink is you are dealing with 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds. They played an emotional game in Baton Rouge. Come on, that was huge for Alabama. They wanted to prove to everybody, man, we're going to shut you up about all this stuff that we haven't played anybody. Which, is all, these kids don't have anything to do with the schedule. They playing who's on the schedule. But they had heard it from people who don't cover this SEC about, what a cupcake schedule it was. Man, listen, they were revved up pretty good about, I'm going to show you just how it is. You're not going to keep their emotions at that high level. And so I suspected, and we talked about it last week, both Alabama and LSU would have a bit of a letdown. It happened to both. They weren't emotionally as charged as they were for that game. They couldn't be. So you are dealing with younger folks who not going to keep that emotional level that high. Even in the NFL, it's the most difficult thing to do to keep teams playing at a certain level. And Nick has talked about it, basically complacency. Or, you play at that super high emotional level and maybe not so much afterwards, trying to keep that even keel. That's a lot easier said than done. And so what happened last week against State did not surprise me one bit. Now, State is one-dimensional because of Nick's highly erratic passing skills. He maybe can hit a few, but most of the time he's all over the board. So you have to be cognizant that if his first read's not there, he's taking off running with it. And that's what LSU did. And they sort of said, hey, wait a minute. We know we can go one-on-one with the receivers. Just make sure he doesn't make a play running the football up the middle. He had one big play doing that against LSU. And so, again, he had some plays where he made a few yardage, but on fourth down, he couldn't do it. He couldn't make the play when he needed to. And again, State will have a center that'll go, I would say, anywhere from 28 to 45 in round one. How many hands did he get on Quinnen Williams? He was in the backfield as much as Nick Fitzgerald. So, it was one of those type games where emotionally you weren't going to be as charged up as you were the week before. And I suspected that type of game from State. Now, I didn't, realizing that injury, then I think that's the biggest thing you take out of this, that how healthy Tua is down the stretch now, getting that hit on that knee. And, how much worse did it get after that?
Mike, let me ask you, can we make an argument that Quinnen Williams is one of the best players, if not the best player in college football?
You can make an argument. I think he's certainly the best defensive lineman, the best lineman in college football today. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Now, last year, and we talked about it, the guard for Notre Dame, Quentin Nelson, he got 15 times the amount of publicity. 15 times the amount that Quinnen Williams has gotten so far. He's playing at Notre Dame. Every week that was some big profile on Nelson. It hasn't been that way on Williams. But he has been as dominant a player on defense as what Nelson was on offense last year for the Irish. And you can say for his play this year, I think he's I think he's one of the top four players in college football. And Alabama's got two of them. I think Tua's one and he's the other. You got two of the top four. And he's that good of a player. He's dominating inside. It's rare to see an interior player be that destructive, to an offense. And yet you're watching it in front of your very eyes of how well he has progressed in a year. And he's taken it by storm. And if he doesn't win every major lineman award, they shouldn't give it out. There is no one close to him this year. No one close to him as far as a dominating force along the offensive or defensive line.
Mike, the reason I bring this up, should he go to New York City? Should it be a part of the Heisman consideration? And then you begin to risk that situation where you might split the vote. If Tua is not as healthy and lingers and limps in to this Heisman Trophy presentation, most people think that he's got it locked up. But if something fades away with a knee injury, it gives out, whatever, then Quinnen Williams may split this vote and Kyler Murray may walk away with this thing. Or you see that as a possibility?
No.
Okay.
No. To me, you're going to have a lot of people out west vote for Minshew at quarterback.
Sure.
Because of what he's done at Washington State. Kyle's going to get some votes because of what he's done at Oklahoma, and he's been impressive there. And he's fallen in some pretty big moccasins now with Baker Mayfield. But there's, to me, it would be the biggest upset ever from a Heisman standpoint if Tua doesn't win this, even if Quinnen is involved in it. Because I think for most people, that first ballot, that first guy on the list, if you're doing this legit and not being favoritism, Tua's the guy. Listen, Minshew, he's a nice college quarterback. He was at our Manning camp, and he talked about his journey with all of us, and he's done a great job. The system is perfect for him with what Leach does. And I think a lot of Kyle as a player, he doesn't have much help defensively. He's got to score 50 points a game, to keep this rolling for OU. But, man, Tua, he's got this one. I don't think there's any question about it. He's got this in his pocket. And if you legitimately look at this like you should, if you're a voter, he's the best player in college football. He is the absolute best.
Mike, final thoughts. I want to get your thoughts on Auburn just for a couple of minutes. We certainly have a biased perspective here where we are. We're looking at Auburn, and we've got this rival game coming up with them in a few days. Look at them as a 2018 overall. What went wrong for the Tigers?
They have every great Auburn team has had a really strong running game. You can't say that about this Auburn football team. I think, Ryan, as much as we talked about Kerryon Johnson last year, his impact on that football team, he carried the 2 buckets of water for a long time, and then Stidham got hot late in the year throwing the football. And then it really became tough to beat because not only you had Stidham, you had Johnson. Now, I'll never forget this. This is the Thursday leading to the Auburn game a year ago when LSU played them. And I talked to Coach O, and, my deal is, what's happening? What do you have to do offensively? And he started to laugh. And he's like, one word, carry on. If we don't stop them, we are going to get our brains kicked in. And if you looked at that game for a quarter and a half, Auburn dominated because Johnson went off. And then Dave Aranda made some adjustments and slowed him down. And basically, it's exactly what O had told me. We want Stidham to beat us. We don't think he can throw against our secondary. And that happened. Without a strong running game, we talk about other conferences and the way they throw the football, but it's different in the SEC. If you don't have a really good running game, and you become one-dimensional against these defenses and those coordinators, they are going to shut you down. And Auburn has not been able to get that started. They could, before we started this, I did shows with a couple of the guys. Well, we got 4 guys coming back. They saw a lot of playing time. But you lost a lot of starters up front along that offensive line, too. But, man, Johnson was a stud football player. And he just was unreal for that period of time, probably 8-9 games into the season of what he was able to do. Now, by that time, Stidham had got into the groove throwing the football. Everything's on him now. Everything is on his back to make one big throw after another without a lot of help from the rushing attack. That's not a lot of quarterbacks that's going to survive that. Not in this league, they won't. They won't survive that. And so I think that's been the biggest disappointment in that that running back by committee that they wanted to do hasn't taken place. But, Ryan, you've done this a long time. The really top Auburn teams, didn't they always have a stud back?
They always run it down your throat.
Always have that guy.
Yeah.
And you can't say that about this football team. They don't have that type of guy. They're strong up front along their defensive line. Now, they can get some pressure on the quarterback, and they're decent against the run. But, man, they up the field, a lot of athletics involved there. Man, they can shoot up the field fast. I do think a team who can throw the football is going to burn them. I do think you can make some plays against their secondary if they don't get pressure. But, again, I think it all comes down to controlling the tempo and almost changing the philosophy of doing what Gus wanted to do. And that was almost try to turn this team into a Pac-12, throw the football 40 times a game offense. And that this league is not built for that. Again, you got to have great balance, and you got to run the football. And past history tells you when Auburn has been very good and are competed for an SEC championship or whatever, they had a strong rushing attack to back that up. And they don't this year. Just don't.
Mike Detillier, college and pro football analyst at WWL AM/FM, a draft report that he publishes in the fall, in the spring as we prepare for the NFL draft. And we might be able to make that. It's in Nashville, Tennessee this year. So we might be covering more of that. SaintsReport.com, ESPN radio, TV work in the New Orleans area. Mike, as always, thank you so much for being a part of the show. I hope you have a great weekend.
Thank you, Ron. One thing for sure, they'll never have the NFL draft in New Orleans.
Why is that?
Never.
Why?
Same weekend as Jazz Festival.
Oh, so you telling me Jazz Festival would outweigh the NFL draft?
Man, Jazz Fest trumps that. For people here, and also, too, it would be to house everybody facility-wise, hotel, motel. Man, Jazz Fest, we got people coming from all over the world for that. And so, it had been brought up, and, the NFL understands, they want center stage. You would have to share that here, and it would be a logistical nightmare to get people, 1 and 2 from the units. But that's why they'll never have it here in New Orleans. And listen, Nashville's great to have it, and I'm glad for them and that sort of thing. But it ain't happening here in New Orleans.
Hey, Mike, I appreciate you, man. Thank you, sir, for being a part of the show. Have a great week.
Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate it, buddy.